It's my pleasure to welcome Erica Keswin. She's a best-selling author, brilliant speaker, and also a workplace strategist. Her first two books, Bringing Your Human to Work and Rituals Roadmap, were both bestsellers, and I'm sure her next book, The Retention Revolution, is sure to be a huge success as well. I think the subtitle sums up the book really well. 7 surprising and very human ways to make employees connected to your company. Welcome, Erica. Great to have you along.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to be here.
Firstly, congratulations on the book. I think you do a really great job in a time when things are shifting so much of identifying workplace trends, but also providing dozens and dozens really of examples and practical ideas of what people can do. Clearly, the world's gone through some significant shifts over the last few years. What have been some of the major changes that you've observed over that time?
First, what I would say about that is that not all of it is new, that some of these trends I saw back 5 years ago when I was writing my first book, Bring Your Human to Work, but the pandemic accelerated many of these trends that we were getting peaks at, way back then. And I think a piece of it was, all of a sudden, at least in speaking about knowledge workers, all the knowledge workers went home and had time to sort of think about their lives and about work and the intersection of work and life and what they wanted and expected from their managers was sort of one thing we were seeing. The other was, the influx of Gen Z into the workplace. Now it's been 3.5 years before this pandemic started, and Gen Z, from a generational perspective, they do want and are demanding different things. So that, the confluence of all of these different things, and people saying that these are really tough times and I want to work for a company that cares about me as a human, and if not, I'm gonna leave, as we all saw with the Great Resignation. So I think it was all of these things coming together, and then looking at what can companies do sort of in response to this all at once.
And it does seem like there was a real rebalancing of I guess, the rights of the employee or the voice of the employee in the mix. And so I think prior to that, if you had have talked about people working, as you say, knowledge workers working the majority of their time at home, I would have thought that would be decades away rather than
Right.
years. But we
And
saw
it would
that
have been,
happen
I
overnight,
think you're
right?
right. It would have been decades away.
Yeah, if at all. And so I think of the world of work for my so I've got an adult son, a couple of teenage sons. I think of the world of work that they're entering, it's quite different. Having said that, there seem to be quite powerful forces moving back the other way as well. I think now that economies around the world perhaps are faltering a little bit, or there's a bit of instability. I think we've seen technology in the field of technology and technology employers, that there's been obviously retrenchments and things that have gone through there. How optimistic are you that leaders, organisations, and employees can actually navigate through this time and arrive at something that people are happy with versus someone winning and someone losing?
Yeah. I don't think there's never a time when every single person's going to be happy, but one of the reasons why I'm excited about the book, and I feel really proud about the book, is that the themes in the book, I believe, ring true regardless of where you are, where the pendulum is swinging. That the best practices, that the stories, that the examples, which I'm sure we'll get into, make work for companies, whether it's a Great Resignation or the Great Recession, whether the employees have the power or the employers have the power. And the idea is really looking at, we have in some companies today, we have 5 generations of people working under one roof. Generationally, people want different things. And I think one of the biggest trends driving this retention revolution is, again, I guess my kids are the same age as your kids, is that the new generations, we found out we both used to work at the Hay Group. I also worked at Russell Reynolds doing executive recruiting. And, I would see a resume, and if that person had moved around a bunch of times, it was like red flag, red flag. And now, people are looking at their careers more as a portfolio, and they want to go where the opportunities are. And I think, for those of us, that are older, in the back of our minds, it still might be a red flag, maybe a smaller one. But I think for the millennials coming right behind us, it's just going to be, par for the course. And
Mm.
so because we know people are likely going to move around, how can we reframe work when you join an organization to say, you know what, we're probably not getting married, we're dating. And I want to think about how we can be mutually beneficial to each other during our time together.
Mm.
And there's all chapters in the book that talk about how to do that, helping people grow and develop up, down, and sideways, making sure managers are elevated and trained, thinking about flexibility. But then when someone comes and says, okay, Andrew, you know what? Like, it's time, I'm going to move on. The shifting of let's move away from you're dead to me or don't let the door hit you in the behind to, you know what? Let's figure out a way to stay connected. And what we're
Mm.
seeing, no surprise, because there were so many people that left in the Great Resignation, is that the grass wasn't always greener. It was sometimes brown, and we saw people come back. Or people are leaving, you and I both come from professional services. If somebody leaves, you can become a client, you can become a customer, your kid could go work there. And so
Mm.
it's really reframing work to create this ecosystem where people come and they go and they come back.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think there's, four or five directions that we'll go into just from what you've said there. I think that idea of people, creating an organization where people can return and being able to manage that process is really interesting. It's very different to what perhaps people might be familiar with, but very, very exciting from a recruitment pool as well to be
Yeah,
able to
for
bring
sure.
back people who understand the organization, know how to go as well. And we'll return a bit later to the load on managers. I think as I was reading through the book, that was probably the question mark I had is how to make some of this sustainable for managers. So we'll come back to that in a little while. But you kick off the book with the onboarding process. Now, I don't know about you. My experience of onboarding process is if I think I worked for a bank for a period of time and I remember being handed a CD-ROM with a training package on it and sliding that in and spending, about 3 or 4 hours clicking next on videos to get inducted into the place. Often the onboarding process is seen as this HR thing that's done to you. And then once that's finally finished, maybe then, maybe at that point you can actually start some work and get some things done. You frame that up quite differently. I'm interested in your thoughts around onboarding, where you've seen that done well. What are some of the things that we should do to avoid perhaps that sense of it being just something that's done to people and kind of this necessary evil?
Yeah. I mean, the data is clear that when onboarding is done well, and I can share some examples of what that means, people are much more likely to stay. So there is a real ROI connected to good onboarding. I think some of the mistakes that people make is that you're one and done. You come in on your first day and you're given your laptop and a key to the bathroom and maybe a password and that's it. And those days are over, or at least should be over. That onboarding, there's something called the 90-day rule. That's when people, are most likely to leave if they're not feeling the love, right? If they don't feel
Mm.
connected. So when you're designing an onboarding process, to really think about it, actually should even start before the first day. There's a piece of the book that's called pre-onboarding,
Mm.
pre-boarding, which is you get the job offer and what happens between August 1st and September 1st, when you actually show up. Companies are now saying that they're actually getting ghosted, that they give someone a job offer and the person accepts, then a month later, you just assume they're going to show up on that first day, either online or in person, and they're just not there. And
Mm.
so thinking about and being really intentional about who's involved in the onboarding process. Your day-to-day manager 100% should be. Think about giving the person a buddy, somebody that's maybe at your level but outside of your group, someone to whom you can ask the dumb questions. Um, and thinking about how to connect them possibly to some of your employee resource groups. If you're a woman, if there's a group for women or a group of millennials, really thinking about connecting this person in a variety of different ways so that they can hit the ground running, when they start.
Yeah, I think you shared an example in a book of the group of people who are involved in that recruitment process and just kind of some of the steps that organization took even before the person started. Can you share a bit more about that
Yeah,
example?
I mean, this was really fun. It was called well, it's even earlier than pre-onboarding. It was when someone actually is given the job offer. They bring when they have the call with that person, let's say six people were involved in the interview process. They have all six people on the call, and each person goes around. It's, Andrew, I'm so excited. I loved meeting with you. I think you're a great fit because you could help on X, Y, or Z. And everybody's saying and really connecting this person's role to the purpose of the organization. We know today that people really want purposeful work, and it's giving people this realistic job preview. Wow, that, I know they say these are the values, but wow, like I am really seeing them. And this is cheesy, but I think important. They're coming off the walls and into the halls. They're bringing these values to life through this process. I mean, we know you get one chance to make that first impression. So this company really takes it far back, and they've, no surprise, have seen their yield from the amount of people that take the job based on their offers is really high. Then I talk about Humu, another company, and their onboarding process where they have all these interesting things, but one that I loved was this sort of 2 week graduation that after 2 weeks, there's, it's their, that I think it's that person's manager goes around and kind of interviews all, like if I'm the new employee, and you're my manager, you would go around and talk to all the people that Erica has worked with and what's gone well and telling stories. And at the end of this 2 weeks, the whole company's on the call, and you graduate from the first part of this onboarding process, and you start to hear from all the people that you work with, again, the impact that you've had in those 2 weeks. And being in the human resources, human capital space, like for many, many, many years, people would say, oh, this is the soft stuff. And I would venture to say that the soft stuff is the hard stuff and the really important stuff. And yes, this may sound soft, but this makes a huge difference to see and hear the impact that you're having on an organization from the beginning.
Mm. Yeah, and I just think about that experience if I was on the receiving end of that kind of process. So where you do have that confidence that you got four or five people that are really looking forward to you beginning, that you start and there's a group of people that are really excited for you and what you've been able to deliver, that sense of belonging and connection, and just
100%.
what that would do in terms of word of mouth and promoting that organization to other people who might want to work there as well, just to build up that, in a time when it's pretty competitive labor market in a lot of areas, being able to build up a supply of people that are say this is quite exceptional. And look, again, I think for people when the book does come out in September, it's what I would reiterate with this is probably no one has exactly best practice, but you've got fantastic examples of where people have developed up a practice that works really well for their organization. It is like a sort of hallmark practices and things that you would actually talk about and share. And there's I didn't count them all, but there's literally dozens of examples in this. There's some really practical things. And I think while people are thinking about, well, what can I do in my own organization? There's some great ideas which you might just take off the shelf from another organization, or
Yep.
you might use it to prompt your
Well,
own
and
process
I
as
would
well.
say plenty of them don't cost anything. I try
Mm.
to use examples from big companies, from small companies. I mean, to have six people, other than the value of your time, which yes is valuable, show up on a call for 10 minutes. Um, I would say that there's a return on that investment from an organizational perspective, and there's no outright hard dollars that costs.
Mm, yeah, for sure. Look, I think one of the other things that you cover is around the world of hybrid work and getting people back into the office. Certainly, it seemed like initially it was, absolutely stay home. That was kind of the pandemic story from a health perspective and well-being. I think organisations scrambled to achieve that. Then it was a sort of a softly inviting people back in, try it out. We'll put some nice food on for you and see how it goes. And now it seems to have taken a bit more of an aggressive tone, come back or else in some organisations. And interestingly, even in technology firms that are, I was seeing Zoom is asking people to come back in. I think it was 2 or 3 days a week, which is fascinating, given that they're the technology that drives people's ability to work from home. You quote this great statistic: 26% of people would rather get a root canal than head back into the office 5 days a week, which I sort of looked at that initially and thought that seems high. But then the more I think about it, actually, it's probably low based on what spoken to people about. As
Yeah.
you're working with different organizations about this, what did you learn about flexible working and when it actually works for people?
It's funny, people will say, well, how many days a week is perfect? There is no one size fit all and a perfect number of days. What I would say is that it's rethinking the kind of work that should be done in the office and the kind of work that maybe is better, when you're doing heads down work so you don't get interrupted at home. But it's really about designing days in the office that are worth the commute and being coordinated. Certain things I'll put a stake in the ground on, and one thing I do feel pretty strongly about is, if someone has a company and they say, okay, everybody back in 3 days and everybody pick which days work for them, to me that doesn't get you, there's no bang for the buck there. You're giving people flexibility, but you and I both commute into our office, and when we're frustrated, all of a sudden we're commuting and then we don't see anybody from our team, and we're thinking, and we're even more mad and thinking, why did I just do that? And would say, I call that the recipe for resentment. And I've seen it loud and clear in many organizations. And so the idea is to think about the nature of the work. Where are people living? Have people moved during the pandemic? Are you making a decision to make people move back to the area? And really designing this return to office or your people strategy, based on the business. And then once you figure out how many days you want people to come in, it's designing these moments that matter. It doesn't need to be all day, every day, but it might be, okay, Wednesday's our day when everybody's in. We're going to have an all hands, or we're going to have lunch, or we're going to have a learning, we're going to have a time where we have a speaker come in, whatever that is. And somebody today, I was recording something earlier today, and it was live and on LinkedIn Learning or LinkedIn Live, and somebody wrote in the chat, I hate going into the office and chit-chatting, and everybody's chit-chatting. And I flipped it and said, well, what about if the purpose of the days you go in was to connect and not to bang out your emails, and just really reframing the role of the office, which is about connection and, to your earlier point, belonging. And we're also dealing with, the Surgeon General's new report of loneliness and isolation. So we just really need to reframe and curate connection when we are in the office, versus picking, a somewhat random number of days.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great way of thinking about, why do we get people together rather than why do we have an office? I think is a great way of framing that up. And I remember that it's interesting around the chit chat one, because I think that's often what people reflect is like how productive I am when I'm at home by myself. And it's one measure of productivity, but it's a very much an individual, step by step, do the work, hand on to someone else kind of productivity rather than building off other ideas. And I do think people react to the water cooler, hopefully we'll get together and invent something amazing, versus a more purposeful approach to that. And so I recall Daniel Goleman once described, great leaders recognize that having a good time isn't a waste of time. And it seems like that's part of it, right? Is that connection and actually building the relationships. It's fascinating that people don't seem to really recognize or value that. It's seen as an impediment instead. So you talk about meetings. Meetings are something that I think are fairly universally despised by many people, probably because they're not run all that well. I think a lot of meeting disciplines that perhaps, I think joining the workforce in the 90s, I sort of firmly remember there being agendas and minute takers, and it was very sort of formalized process, some of the meetings that I was a part of. But people often see them as demotivating, waste of time. You describe them as a critical ingredient in retention, something that's really central. What's so magic about meetings, and how do we actually make the most out of those?
Yeah. It's funny. You mentioned Zoom going back to the employees going back to the office, and I'm sure you've seen some of the articles about some of the companies that got rid of all their meetings. I think maybe Spotify was one. Yeah, okay, we're getting rid of every single meeting and we're counting all the minutes that we're saving. First, I actually don't believe that it's even possible to get rid of all your meetings, nor do I think it's a good thing that people do need to meet, they do need to connect, but there is a way to do it well. There's certainly many ways to do it not well. So in this chapter, I break it down to what I call the three P's of meetings. The first is purpose. What is the purpose of your meeting? Do a purpose audit. Look at your week and map out all of your meetings. And if you really go back and sort of peel the onion back on the purpose of the meetings, I would venture to guess you could get rid of 20 to 30% of your meetings. Like some of these meetings are there because of inertia. Some of your meetings are there because that we all try to be inclusive, but being inclusive in meetings is not necessarily a good thing. You want the fewest number of people that really need to be in a meeting to make the decision that you need to make. So it's about being more strategic. The second P is presence. And as we all know, physical presence and sort of mental, emotional, psychological presence are two very different things. And, and I think this is even more important in this hybrid world that we're not seeing each other all that much. You know, are our cameras on? Are our cameras off? What are the expectations around presence? I'm not saying that we need to have our cameras on in every meeting, but in the ones that we do, I really have seen it to be detrimental to relationships of people when people are multitasking while they're meeting. So, again, it's not to say it needs to be all one way, and it's not good to be on a million meetings with your cameras on all day either, but don't leave it to chance, which leads me to the third P, which are protocols. That, we are in the Wild West right now with all of this. And what do we need in the Wild West is a sheriff who kind of provides guidelines and protocols and rules of the road, which don't need to be set in stone forever. But guidance is helpful. I think whether you're talking about your kids at home or employees at work, so that people are generally on the same page. So whether that's the length of meetings, I think it's so important right now not to be late to meetings when people are working at home all day and they're back to back to back to back, because it really is, disrespectful. So what are these rules of the road within your organization? And how does that align with your values as a company and also as a leader?
Yeah, it's outstanding, Erica. I think that purpose, presence, protocols is a really clear way of thinking about it. I think that I was speaking with someone just last week, and I was saying that they started with an organization, and what happens? You're added to a whole bunch of existing meetings, and she'd been with the organization for several months, and was at meetings that she still didn't know what the purpose was. Why am I here? What is this meeting about? And still trying to figure it out a couple of months in, which suggests to me that there's probably not a clear purpose, or at least not one that's discernible. And I think if it is purposeful, then that multitasking drops right off, I would imagine, because people see it's not a waste of time. Actually, I do need to concentrate. Maybe we've got 25 minutes for this meeting. It's not an hour. And so we really need to focus and get things done. I was interested with Atlassian, the model they've taken. So obviously, software business, again, enables people to work from anywhere, and they allow people to basically, you can live wherever you want, work with us. But they bring people in, I think it's once a quarter, in more of a conference format. So 2 to 3 days together, and
Yep.
really do that purposeful, connected work. It just strikes me as a really great model and approach. But yeah, the meeting disciplines is an interesting one. I love that opportunity for saving there, as well as people think about the meetings that they're in. Is probably I'm starting to reflect on meetings. A few of mine I probably need to get rid of as well. So thanks, Erica. Checks in the mail. So you wrote a book about the importance of managers, and I it was there's an article, it's a way back in 2011, but in Harvard Business Review, and it was this title that really sort of annoyed me a bit. It was called First, Let's Fire All the Managers, and it was based on a pretty interesting, it's a tomato processing business in America that basically has a model where people get themselves into teams and organize themselves and get things done. But the overwhelming sense in that article is managers are a waste of time. They're expensive, and obviously you can have too many layers of management, but it was all focused on the cost and the waste around management. You talk about the need to elevate and celebrate our managers. So tell us more about that. Why are managers so important at the moment?
So glad you asked that. I will say, this is, I'm obsessed right now with these middle managers. And 6 months ago, we were seeing, the tech companies, they were firing managers. Let's flatten the organizations. And we don't need these managers. I said then, and I'm going to double down on it now, is that managers are the MVPs of the retention revolution. And if you don't like the word middle, like we can just say they're in the center, right? So they're connected to the senior leadership, bringing these strategies to life, and they're on the front lines. They're the ones that have to manage all of this, all of the talk about remote work and flexible work and everybody wanting an exception. They're the ones that are dealing with all of their employees and the challenges around the pandemic and the mental health, issues that people had. And so to me, we need to lean in and elevate the role from an organizational standpoint and not just say, all right, you know what, you're a great salesperson. Okay, now you're a sales manager. When the person may not even enjoy managing, want to be a manager, and they have no training in being a manager. So to me, this is if I had a big company right now with a lot of people, this is where I would be investing a lot of my time, energy, and money. And it is very closely aligned and connected to retention, with the Gallup study, right? People leave managers, not companies. And so we need to really elevate this role, figure out think about career pathing, who should be a manager, who shouldn't be a manager, and really celebrate them and recognize them. And the leaders need to, managers are putting their own oxygen mask on last, right? They're taking care of everyone, and I feel like we organizationally need to help them put the oxygen mask on themselves first.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think, you're talking about that. Okay, now you're a sales manager. I think a lot of those management roles, management is something that's added on to almost
Yeah.
an existing full role. So you got this role. So please deliver all of this personally. Plus, we got a team here that we'd like you. So it's like a little add-on rather than a
Right, they don't
core
have time to
purpose.
actually manage, and I'm glad you're raising that. I mean, there's a new book that just came out a couple of weeks ago that I read. Like, I loved it, totally geeked out over it. It's called The Power to the Middle, and it was almost like we were in each other's minds as I was working on mine, they were working on theirs. But it talks about how, and there's a statistic in the book, the managers spend on average 50% of their time, actually more than that, doing administrative work. And so if people really want their managers to manage, yes, we need to train them, but we also need to give them the time and the space and the runway to do it, because they report higher levels of burnout than any other employee type in an organization.
Yeah, and look, it's one of the questions that sort of came through the book is thinking about that manager role, and you've partly answered that, I think, in terms of prioritizing it, make sure we got the right number of managers, the right span of control as well with that as but this idea of treating employees as customers, and so yeah, for a Gen Xer like myself, I sort of look at that and go, wow, that's pretty indulgent. Coming out of university into a recession, and it's like, oh, thank goodness I've got a job was kind of the
Yeah,
starting
me,
experience
me
for me.
too.
Yeah,
Me
and I feel like an old man yelling at the moon a little bit there, but versus this world now where it's like you're the customer, like we really want to look after you, and I just think about that load on a manager of balancing what the organization needs to deliver with this really diverse set of individual needs, preferences. I want to work this day, not this day.
Well,
I've got
here's an
these. Yeah.
interesting example. And I'm on the same page as you. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, and but the world is changing, and Gen Z is is going to make up most of the workplace. And so the old folks in the room like me, I need to like change my thinking, which writing and researching this book certainly has. But I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I'll try to find it and I'll send it to you for the show notes. But there was like a dialogue, and the leader was saying that he could not believe he was interviewing, this great young person for a role. And he asked her all the questions, and then she had questions for him. And one of her questions was something like, so, do you anticipate over time, like, could I ever work just part time? Not now, but down the road. And he was thinking, well, we don't really do that. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'll have to check if it's ever a possibility. Then she said to him, where does your company stand on, carbon emissions? and had nothing to do with the industry that they were in. But again, it goes to Gen Z and wanting to work for companies where they're aligned in terms of purpose and values. And the person that was interviewing her talked about, he was like, I actually have no idea. And so and she turned the tables, and literally the next day, before they even got back to her with an offer, she turned them down. So it is rethinking, we'll meet somewhere in the middle, but it is a different world. And the Gen Z, they're going to vote with their feet, and they're not going to take jobs, if they're not feeling connected to purpose and values, and to seeing if they can grow and develop and all these things that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think the flip side of that, which I think is a real theme running, like that humanness is a real theme that runs through your book, obviously through each of the books that you've written as well. It's what ties them together so nicely. But that idea of, if you do have that purpose-driven person, and you can actually hook into that, like just how powerful that is as well. So the flip side of that, of the potential of that, if we can grab that, versus someone who's just turning up to, because it's somewhere I earn money,
Yeah.
and I think that then links back to that ability to go out of the organization, maybe come back, say, I really like their values, the way they ran things, and the focus they had. And so, yeah, that purpose driven, really getting the best out of that, which probably leads us to the offboarding process, which is a fascinating one, because I think for most organizations, if you look at some of the tech firms, their offboarding process was to disable someone's access to their email. That was kind of the, start and finish of the offboarding process, which is fascinating, I think, because some of those same organizations were held up as real employers of choice, amazing sort of humanistic companies, but then seem quite aggressive and cold-hearted at the flip side of it, which I can understand from a security perspective and access to data and all those sorts of things. So I kind of get what drives some of that. But you talk about offboarding process. It really took me back to a colleague of mine who said, you're never more celebrated than on your final day. It's the day when everyone goes, oh, Erica, you were amazing. You delivered so much. What are we going to do without you? And it's like, why didn't you tell me this a year ago? But I think we're pretty bad at offboarding typically. What's your sense in terms of the benefits of that and where you've seen that done well?
So one of the most fun and inspirational examples, I actually write about it in Bring Your Human to Work, is a company in Chicago called Jellyvision. And they have what's called the graceful leave policy. And they think about offboarding on someone's first day. So they bring you in, Andrew, and during the onboarding, they say, we are so excited to have you. And they have their whole onboarding process. But they also say, it was really hard to find you. You have unique skills. And if and when you leave, it is going to be really hard to replace you. So, Andrew, we have a philosophy here called the graceful leave. And if you decide that it's time for you to go for whatever reason, if you let us know, if you work with us, we will help you. We will open up our Rolodex. We will do research for you. We will support you and work together to give you a soft landing in this new role. And they are very, very explicit about it. And they talk about it on the first day of work. So that to me, I was like, wow, talk about a virtuous cycle of really setting this up, really from the person's first day. So that's how I began to frame my thinking around offboarding, that let's try not to take it so personally that people might leave. And it's better for all of us if we can stay on good terms and stay connected. The professional services firms in general have done this better over time, because when somebody leaves, they could it makes good business. It always makes good business sense, but in particular for professional services, because you can easily become a client and a customer. At McKinsey, you become part of their alumni network on your first day of work. So all of a sudden you're seeing, wow, I just started and I'm going to be here for however long, but I'm already part of this unbelievable network, this family, that I can tap into forever. And so so that's really a big piece of it.
Yeah, fantastic. And again, a great example of something that's, close to zero cost, really. It's something that can be run with a little bit of
Yes.
administrative effort, but it's more the intent and the communication of that as well, and how that works. I'm interested in the book writing process that you went through. So you wrote this through the pandemic, basically. So a fascinating time. And again, congratulations on, I think it's a huge achievement to write one book, let alone three. And I think the connections between those are really nice as well. They do, I think one of the, in the, kind of the setup for the books. One, someone talked about it as a sort of a trilogy of books, and it does sort of fit together nicely like that as well. Talk to me about that process. How did you find that? How did you maintain that motivation? It's a pretty challenging time to be really achieving anything. I think people were delighted if they figured out how to get a sourdough going, let alone write a book. So be fascinated in your process through that and what it took to kind of maintain the motivation and get this delivered.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely challenging, I would say. But a big part of the motivation came from, the people that are on my team and my agent that came and said, look, you've written these books and everything we know about work has been flipped on its head. We really, what can you add to this conversation to help people make work better for everyone? So part of it was that I've like built over these years this community of people that looked to me for these ideas and really wanted to give something back in this moment of time, because at least in the 25 years since I've been doing this, I've never seen such a huge shift. So I'd say that's one piece. The second piece is, like many of us, I wasn't traveling. And so you do realize there is more built-in time and energy when you're not on a plane as much and you're not getting stuck. So that was a little bit of an added bonus. And then the third was I was just seeing and talking to people through my work of these really interesting and creative ways that people were addressing it. And I almost just couldn't help myself. And I think things are good in threes. So it seemed like a good ending to this, human trilogy.
Well, that's it. Well, hopefully there's another trilogy that comes off the back of it. So you don't have to worry about that just yet. Let's just get
Yeah,
this one released first. But
exactly. Like,
that's
right.
once you get into that, it'd be great to have you back and talk about that as well. And so congratulations again on the book. I think, it's a really powerful reminder about how workplaces are at their core, they're human. It's not just a collection of jobs and pieces of technology, but they're human, and that sense of belonging and connection is really important as well. If people want to find out more about your work, so you've got a podcast, you do speaking engagements as well, and you've got on your website, you've got some topics around that. And I think, having seen some of your clips and what you've done elsewhere, that would be a great way to connect and have you involved in, I imagine, organisational conferences and a range of other things. But what's the best way for people to be across your work and find out more about the book?
You can find me, really all the information's on my website, which is my name, ericakeswin.com. You can always email me at ericakeswin.com. If you send me an email and say you heard me on this podcast, I do have a free ebook that I send people from Bring Your Human to Work. I'm happy to send that to anybody that reaches out to me. And I also, one thing that might be interested specifically to this community, I've just recorded my third and fourth LinkedIn learning course. So my first course, 36,000 people, like over 36,000 now have watched it. It's called Human Leadership. So it really, and it's only 36 minutes. So in 36 minutes, how you can sort of upscale and become a more human leader. And there's stories from all the different books. There's one on onboarding in this hybrid world, which is connected more to this third book. And then the other two I just recorded and they're coming out in October. One is about the managers, my obsession, as I mentioned. And the other one is all about upskilling and internal mobility, which, I think these days, if you don't create that internal ecosystem for growth, your people are going to leave to find it somewhere else. So just all really cool topics. And I think for many companies do provide LinkedIn Learning, and it's a way to access the content in a different way.
Yeah, fascinating. That's great. Yeah, I wasn't aware of those resources. So they're that's a great opportunity to dig into some of those topics. And yeah, something like 36 minutes, that sounds like perfectly achievable for people. And I think that upside of just so refreshers and reminders around some of these things. But again, and I know I've mentioned it several times, but those examples from different organizations, no one's got best practice, but there's some really good ideas. And if you're a leader in an organization, a great way to pilot some things, try some things out, piece them together, see if they work for you, and it's some great things there. So again, congratulations on the book, Erica. Really looking forward to that coming out. So that's coming out in September, I believe. Is that right?
Yep, September 26th.
Excellent. Well, I feel very privileged to have been able to have a read through it prior to that. So, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. Best wishes with the release, and all the best for the rest of the week.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And it was great to meet you.